Welcome back to the Oilfield 360 podcast. We're coming to you live from the Flecha Azul Tequila podcast studio. I'm one of your hosts, David DeRoe, and I'm joined by my co-host extraordinaire, Josh Lowry. How are you doing this afternoon, Josh?
Good afternoon, David. I am doing well. Thank you for doing the intro for us today.
Yeah, it's kind of unusual. You're sitting in my chair. I'm doing the intro.
Well, I'm sitting in your chair because we added cameras, and I apparently am going bald back there. Nobody told me. And the cameras exposed this, so I had to move immediately. I can't sit in my old chair anymore.
Well, how did I do? Did I do okay?
You did great. Okay. You did great. The Flecha Azul podcast studio is difficult to that's a mouthful.
Well, I think of Flecha Azul Tequila all the time.
Yeah, I'm just saying it. There's a lot to say there. That's a tough one.
Aaron, are you listening? I think of Flecha Azul Tequila all the time.
Oh, he's definitely listening.
Yeah.
Well, so this is we've had a very busy day. This is, again, day one of cameras in the studio. We are going to do our first episode with cameras. So if you're listening to this, you could probably go and find this on YouTube and a couple of other places that we're going to have at least excerpts of this online. So we are going to do we have got multiple people in the room today, and I'm going to start by introducing one of our friends, Ira Green. Ira, welcome to the studio today.
Thanks. Great being here. Really appreciate it. It's very nice.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's your first time you've seen it, isn't it?
It is the first time I've seen it. I'm very impressed.
Well, Ira, you are the managing director and head of energy capital markets for Simmons Energy, division of Piper Jaffray. But you guys have been a Piper Sandler, excuse me. I know I screwed that up there.
That's
Piper.
Okay.
And you have been a sponsor from the start with the podcast, so we appreciate your guys' support. And we kind of worked our way into this studio. So I know that you kind of waited till we got to the creme de la creme before you came to visit. I appreciate that.
Well, I think, we show better on, live with video. So we wanted to wait for that. But no, we appreciate it. It's been a great partnership. You guys are doing a great job for the entire energy industry. We're a little beat up right now, but you guys are carrying the flag, and we really appreciate it.
Well, we appreciate your support. And what's funny is on our podcast, we always reference Victoria as basically, please let us get this through.
She's famous.
She's famous, and she'll block certain things. She lets certain things go. So we have her in the office today. So we basically have to just mind our P's and Q's, get past her. And if we do it, we're all set. This is going to be great.
Yeah.
But we have other guests here. Can you please introduce one of your friends and one of the guests of the show?
Sure. Yeah. I'm the B team today. And, just so everybody knows, we at Simmons, we've had, we cover a number of energy practices, oil service, very strong, midstream, E&P. For about 15 years, we've covered the renewables sector. And we got to know John a while back through Spencer Ripstein, one of our co-heads of energy, and we worked with him a long time ago. We've recently made a huge push on the renewables side. We just, research came out with a thematic piece. It's very interesting. It's dated just a couple of days ago, which is September 14th. So great timing. But John has been a great friend of the firm. We have John Berger here. He is CEO of Sonova Energy International. It's a leading residential solar and energy storage provider. John, their ticker is NOVA. They're a public company, went public last year, done very well. A real stalwart out there in the renewables sector, if you will. John's been in this business over 2 decades in various capacities, really in the renewable, or what he likes to call sometimes new energy sector. His company that we worked with a long time ago, we helped him sell, was Standard Renewables. Like that was back in 12 years ago, 2008 timeframe. But I'll let you, John, tell more about his career, but there are a couple of things you need to know. He does have an MBA from Harvard, which makes him maybe the smartest guy in this room. And the second, I'm a Longhorn, but he is a Texas Aggie, an engineer, which is a badge of honor to wear. And I think the third thing, if I remember, he cut R.C. Slocum's lawn for him when he was growing up. That's right.
Coach Kubiak's, actually.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was Coach Kubiak.
Coach Slocum wouldn't let me cut his yard.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, got it. Well, that makes sense. So anyway.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, speaking of the smartest guy in the room, unless it's on that side of the room, it's kind of a no contest here. So yeah, I would ask this question, which we always do to our guests. Have you ever been on a podcast? But as I was doing research, you're easy to find. You're a CEO of a publicly traded company. You are carrying the mantle for an industry right now. You're doing a great job of it. I mean, you've got a lot of, I don't want to say weight on your shoulders because it feels more like wind at your back, and maybe you can comment on that. But have you ever done a podcast before is our standard question.
Yes.
You have?
Yes.
Now, our other question, and we really only say this because we like to hear how great we are. Have you ever been to a podcast that is this professionally done?
Oh, no.
The others are just garbage?
Yeah. This is definitely better. How about that?
No, we like extremes around here. It's either one or the other. So, no, listen, and I do highly recommend anybody who's listening to go do some research on Mr. Berger's YouTube and a couple different other places, because we're going to be talking about some topics that are maybe a little unfamiliar to our audience, but need to be explored. And we'll give some color to some of the comments that we're going to be talking about. But per the usual, the audience that we have really cares about the story of our guests and how did they get to where they are today. And yours, although you're a CEO of a publicly traded company, it is truly an entrepreneurial story from the start. Can you give us I looked how you got started. Can you give us a start from maybe the early 2000s to now? I mean, you started at Enron. I don't know if you want to go that far back, but.
Yeah, sure. So I'll go back a little bit further. I grew up in Bryan, Texas. Went to high school, obviously, in Bryan, and went to Texas A&M, as I mentioned, and got a civil engineering degree. I grew up in the construction business. My dad had 3 degrees from A&M, basically did construction inspection. And so I got out of A&M and decided I didn't want to do construction anymore. I wanted to go energy. And I got a job at Enron. And so I went there and I packed all my stuff up and went to Houston because I needed the money, and started work the next day. And I thought I was going to get sent off in an oil platform in the Gulf. I really did. And they put me on the power trading desk, and I was working nights and weekends. I thought that's why I worked hard at A&M, was not to work nights and weekends. But it worked out. I got shipped off 5 weeks later into running a utility, believe it or not, in the control room at the ripe age of 22 in Atlanta during the Olympic Games, which, the extracurricular activities after you got off work was awesome. But you got to learn how to run a utility. Came back to Houston, ran the hourly trade desk, and then ran the Southeast cash desk for Enron. Did a little venture cap investment, and then took off and went to Boston in August of 2001. For those of us in Houston, that was a pretty darn good timing.
Good timing.
Yeah. So unfortunately that Enron collapsed, and so I worked at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in Washington. Flew back and forth during in between my years at Harvard, and then came back to Houston and felt like there was going to be a change in the energy business, and missed the shell or fracking boom. I wish I'd hit that one, but I didn't. And started doing venture capital and oil and gas and renewable energy, and then really fell into the idea about doing a renewable energy. The company that Ira spoke of, Standard Renewable, which is really a solar contractor for government buildings, commercial and residential. And we dominated the southern United States, sold that business, and then started another one that was a lot like Sonova. Basically, think it was a wireless power company with a dealer network. And we did nothing but residential and sold that business to NRG, and then started Sonova up in November 12.
Before we get into that, you said something. You felt like the energy business was going to change. That's somewhat, if you didn't go into shale in the mid 2004-5 timeframe, I'm assuming you're talking about.
That's right.
What was triggering you to say that something was going to change?
I felt like that the number of people globally, specifically China and India, and it's hard for us to imagine, but, kind of circa 2003, that was not an obvious thought process that China coming online was going to have an impact on the oil prices and energy prices. That was very much a, speculative bet and thought, if you will. And I thought that, just given travels that I'd done in Asia on my honeymoon, as a matter of fact, and I thought that this is real. You can't take that many people and cram them into a semblance of our way of life here in the West and not have a material impact on energy, and that proved to be correct. I also thought that you couldn't have that kind of pollution that came with it. That there's going to have to be an offset there, and technology was going to have to be a part of the solution here. So I went after the solution to the problems instead of, hey, let's just focus on the price zooming up past $100 a barrel. What would make more sense there? So sometimes, you wish you had that one back. I wish I would have been able to get in the oil business there for a little bit, at least for 10 years.
Yeah,
and then switch to the solution
How
side.
about today?
It was a run for sure. I mean,
it was one heck of a run.
Yeah, and it still has its it's got its place, obviously, and I'm sure we'll again talk about that further.
Yeah.
But that really is an interesting vision in 2003-4 to see that and to pick something up on a honeymoon that you felt like could be an entirely different business shift. Yeah, that's interesting to see that back then.
So, we go back to Standard Renewables. We're talking mid-2000s, and it seemed like when we first picked up the sector and started getting to know you, a lot of the renewables activity was driven by, scarcity before the shale boom of traditional carbon-based products and energy security. Does Saudi Arabia control the price of oil, and is that going to hurt our economy? That was a big push. ESG was a much smaller component. Fast forward now, let's go forward to now, 15 years later, it seems different. It also seems like VCs were participating more back then. It was more experiments, and now we're seeing private equity, traditional energy guys getting in. What are your observations over that time in terms of the changes you've seen?
Yeah, you're right, Ira. A lot of the big venture capital firms on Sand Hill Road and so forth were getting involved back at that time period. Really, all of them thought that this was a lot like IT venture capital. Let me go find the next Google and Amazon and
Moore's
so forth.
Law. Yeah.
Moore's Law and all that. And we do have some variations and some semblance of some sort of Moore's Law within solar panels and batteries. But at the end of the day, I think what everybody found out and what I suspected is that energy was not going to be near as easy for venture capitalists. The amount of capital, the amount of time you needed to get a technology and into market or a solution was quite a bit higher, and therefore you're going to have fewer winners, and those fewer winners are going to need a lot more money than say even a Google did. Now Amazon's not a great example because they did need a lot of money and still do to grow out their infrastructure business and logistics. But most of what happened in the Valley over the last 30, 40 years has been relatively capital light. That is not the energy business, whether it's oil and gas or whether it's solar and batteries. And so it's had to shift over to private equity firms like the firm that backed me, Energy Capital Partners, big dollars, public companies. You need to have those kind of access to a lot bigger capital sources, not only equity, but also in debt. And you just don't have that same need and requirement in IT for the most part.
Yeah, and I guess back then oil was over 100, so it made sense and people could deal with the subsidies. But I guess the cost of the technology has come down over time.
Yeah.
Number one. And then talk a little bit about the ESG component and the push now toward renewables and how all that triangulates, if you will.
Yeah, the environmental aspect has been a part of this the whole way through, but it wasn't as much a highlight, for most investors in talking about it. I think if you're in your initial stage investments, your angels and so forth, I think that probably, that drove them. I'm not entirely sure about the venture capital folks, and that doesn't say anything disparaging about them at all. It's just I thought that they thought this was, again, more of a techie type bet, and in ways it is, and in ways it's not, as I laid out. When Obama came into office, President Obama, there was a lot about climate change, and then that kind of fizzled out, frankly. And now it's surging back even stronger, much, much stronger than we've ever seen. Mainly because, there's a lot of more and more evidence that this is real, this is happening. We've got to do some things about it. It's also spread globally. The U.S. is pretty far behind, both in perception of the problem, but also just the amount of capital and companies that are out there. The U.S. is pretty far behind Europe and China and Australia, Japan, and some major economies of the world. And so what we have as a perspective from our country is not the same at all than it is globally. And so in some ways, globally, things have kind of caught up with us, if you will, and that ESG push is strong because of more global push than anything else. You go to Europe, for instance, as you know, you'll see a lot more money flows, interest, funds, investors focused on ESG even today than you do have here in the U.S., although the U.S. is trying to catch up pretty quickly.
Do you think COVID-19 will speed or has sped up the ESG process?
Unquestionably.
Social awareness, can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, and also the infrastructure reliability. I mean, one of the things, and you remember that house in Galveston?
Yeah.
We went out
Yeah, I
to the
remember
guy's
it well.
park. We had windmills, solar
Yeah.
panels, and we had this battery thing that was
Yeah.
out there. This is 2005.
Yeah.
Just kind of put that in perspective. That house still exists, by the way. That was the only house down there when Ike flattened Galveston that worked.
Yeah.
It was literally a shining house on a hill, and everything else was dark. My in-laws actually slept in there after the storm. That house still exists, by the way, and still has those solar panels on and everything else. Now I see that house just as I saw back in 2005. Probably not the windmill. There's just too much maintenance and everything, but there's a lot more software and such that we can talk about, integration, gensets even, which we had a genset on that. It was diesel fired, it was pretty natural gas, what we typically use. But that vision back then is becoming reality now. So it was always in my mind more about how do you bring higher reliability, resiliency to your energy usage, and that's certainly the case now and growing. And why did the pandemic highlight that? Because the only thing worse than being stuck at your home, as you were talking about earlier, and having to deal with that versus having an outlet to the office.
I love you, family, if you're listening to this.
I love being at home.
Yes,
too.
I love being at home. It was wonderful.
Yes.
Probably just set myself up, didn't I, Josh?
John does too.
But is to be stuck in your home without power.
Oh,
I mean,
can't
think
even-
about it. I mean, think about
my
it.
internet went out 2 days ago, and I thought I was going to go crazy. Keep
Yes.
going. Sorry.
Yeah.
And I
And
did.
and so, we have backup generators, at least we do at the office, to prevent some of these type of things. But most people don't have that in their house, and the center point's good enough. Well, actually, it's not. And we all know that, particularly in a hurricane-prone zone, and we seem to have unprecedented flooding about once every 3 or 4 months.
Online
it's
learning. What if all that goes
online
on?
learning, all this stuff. We've got to have a better system where we should look, and this is where I think the energy business is going. We look more like the internet.
Let me do something for the audience here because they probably haven't done their research yet. I don't want to go all the way to the end here, but give the audience what Sonova is. I mean, I heard you mention that the service that you sold to NRG, but tell them what Sonova is when you're describing, or as you're describing where we're going right now.
So Sonova is a residential solar and storage service provider. We are the AT&T, we're the Verizon. Think of it that way, as we are a wireless power company. So what we're doing is we're having our dealers, which are independently owned contractors, just like you have at AT&T, cellular,
Like an ADT security system. Right? That was the best example. I heard.
Yep. And so what we're doing is we're having those dealers go out and sign our customers up and then put our equipment on the roof. We finance it. So if you want to finance it under a loan, a lease, a power purchase agreement, whatever you want to do, you just got to pay us per month. If you want to pay cash, we'll sell you the service just by itself. And so it's exactly like you walk into an AT&T wireless store. Some people, and I've done it before, just want to pay for the iPhone right up front, right? Or whatever you get, Samsung phone. And then some want to pay on a per month basis, and some of those contracts are longer and got trade-in capability, some don't, all that stuff. That's exactly our business. Is we go in, we say, hey, we're going to sell you power. We're going to sell you cheaper power, cleaner power, and now it's storage, more reliable power, and we'll make all of that work just like a utility.
I'm just going to, only for pure education here, we're talking about solar panels. And then when you say storage, you're talking about
batteries.
That's what giant batteries. Like if you were maybe the underneath of a Tesla battery, you put that on the, stood it vertical on the side of your house, correct? Something to that effect?
Yeah, I wouldn't call them giant.
It's true. It's not giant.
Yeah, it's probably about this the size of that seat cushion.
Pretty cool.
Oh, really? This is as big as it is. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I said. I really wouldn't call it giant
Okay.
at all.
So we're talking about maybe 2.5 feet by 3.5 feet tall type thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if that. And it depends. You're going to ask me, well, how long does that make my house run and all that? It depends on where you are. And one of the things that we'll talk about here maybe some more is Houston has the highest consumption per square foot on average in everybody's home here than any place in the United States.
Is that because of AC?
AC, our weather's a little bit hot. I don't know if
Yeah.
y'all noticed.
Yeah,
It gets pretty humid here.
It's God's country. God's country.
It's, yeah. I mean, and we had this, I also think it's culture too. It definitely is, right? We just don't think much of using energy because mainly we've been in the energy business, and most of us want the price of energy to go up, not down, like everywhere else in the country. So when you look at all that, we have a very, very unique view than most other Americans do. So if you're in Hawaii, you're in Northern California, you're in Colorado, you're in Puerto Rico, and so forth, the amount of energy they consume per square foot of the house is very, very small compared to Houston. So that battery in Puerto Rico, I can take 2 of those things. I cut the cord. You don't need the utility anymore. Here in Houston, probably make it about 4 or 5. So that's a very different view about how much equipment you would need, and therefore what you're willing to spend.
And these are Tesla batteries.
Well, we sell. We also do Generac batteries. They just launched that product. Very good company. Putting a lot of money and effort into getting those that power cells, they call it, the product. And then yes, most of what we do is we're the biggest buyer of Tesla Powerwalls in North America.
Most people don't realize that Tesla makes that product.
I highly recommend you go Google some of this stuff. It's really cool to see if you haven't seen it. That's why I'm trying to give as much of a visual for those of you who are driving right now, to when you get home to go Google some of this stuff to see exactly what we're talking about. It does look like power of the future. I mean, it really does when you kind of see it in a garage or on the side of a house.
And there's more companies coming. Panasonic's going to have their own here pretty soon. There's companies called Enphase that make inverters out there, publicly traded. Yet another company should have bought the stock on. Personally, I couldn't do that, but we buy the gear. But great relationship there. Solar Edge out of Tel Aviv, out of Israel, another publicly traded company. They're launching product. We got some of the Chinese companies, some more of the Japanese companies. LG, everybody knows who LG is. I got LG TVs in my house. They're the world's largest battery maker. They just launched yet another version of their product, next iteration. So there is so much going on, and the speed at which the change is occurring is accelerating. So that's what's fascinating is that what's happening now, what happened over the last 12 months will probably happen in the next 6 months in terms of the speed of change.
You brought up ESG, Ira.
Yeah.
We started the Energy Esg Council, which is to try to drive a narrative for the energy industry on a uniform basis, both from a fossil fuels perspective, but also an alternative and renewable energy perspective. But when you think at things objectively, there's positives and negatives with everything. As it relates to renewables, one of the comments you hear often is, yeah, that's great, but you don't have the storage capability you possess with fossil fuels, whether it be gas or oil. And then you've also got the legacy environmental impact with the batteries. Their life is somewhat finite. So do you have any thoughts or comments about the battery technology and the stability of the batteries and how they're developing and how we deal with the residual waste associated with the technology?
Yeah, sure. One thing I would caution that probably the number one mistake I've seen made by friends here in Houston is taking the current technology and not assuming any improvement.
Sure.
So extrapolating, which is really fascinating because if you look at fracking technology, how many times I already said, well, technology's getting better. So look at my well cost this, frack costs this, it looks like this. And some of that turned out and some of it didn't, right? I mean, so what's fascinating is that because we're all human, we look at the world the way that we want it to be.
Sure.
Right? We can't help it. And most of us, it's really tough to be objective about it. And what I would say is some of those problems you listed, like for instance, the storage problem. I mean, how many times have I been told, yeah, what you going to do when the wind don't blow and the sun don't shine, boy? and now up until about 3 years ago, I said, well, that's a good point. Now I said, well, I'll sell you a battery.
Yeah.
Okay. So Let me take that big concern, take it off the table. Now, cost, performance, improvement of the battery, energy, efficiency, if you will. That's improving rapidly. In fact, we got Elon Musk is going to have a battery day next week, and he's got some big improvements coming out. We'll see how big those really are, but my guess, knowing him, he's the greatest showman on earth, right? He's got to have something big to say, or he's got a whole day on it, right? And there's other breakthroughs that are happening in some of these car companies. Lucid Car, company feels they've got a pretty interesting battery technology. I can tell you there's a lot of other companies out there. LG feels like they're making breakthroughs and so forth. So even the top chemists of the world have been dead wrong about the progression of lithium-ion batteries just in the last 24, 36 months. I mean, you thought that would be right over the next 24, 36 months for at least probably, I could understand somebody's wrong after 10 years or something like that. There's a lot that happened in 10 years. But you missed it by 24 months? Something went wrong. Right. And it's reassessing, what is possible when you put the human minds to it globally and you give the billions and really hundreds of billions of dollars to invest. And the amount of money that's coming into this space right now is in really just over even this year. And you look at, for instance, Tesla's stock market performance. Tesla could take its market cap and buy Exxon over 2 times over and have money left over. Exxon, right? And so when you look at all this, the amount of money that's going in there is going to speed the technology improvement up dramatically. So there's a lot here that's needs to be done to solve these problems. Good news is there's a lot of companies out there that need Iris and his team's services to go out there and raise a lot of money to get these companies funded and up in operation.
We are hopeful. I did catch there might be a job opening in cobalt mining. My son just graduated from college, so I want to follow up with you after that. No, I'm just kidding. I want to actually build on this battery topic here. But I want to talk about traditional energy because you've always spoken, we can't just turn off the light switch on traditional energy and move to whatever new deal you want to call it, and we're only renewables. Right. It's almost like both need to be compatible over time. And I guess, electric vehicles are here. They're, accelerating fast. There's a lot of batteries that need to be made, and they're expensive. And you got to plug the cars in every night or whatever it is. I don't know. How do you feel about traditional energy and maybe natural gas as a bridge? Or you've spoken about that before, and I think intelligently in that, hey, I see the big picture here. It's not just one or the other.
Right. Yeah. I'm a big believer in that. And, first and foremost, I think that the people in oil and gas are good people. Yeah. And they're smart people. And, we've been hiring a lot of them. And really, I built Sonova with those folks. And again, we're continuing to hire really, frankly, more every week. So I think that if you want to make a change into other part of the energy industry, when we talk about the energy industry, we need to start rephrasing ourselves as like, here's the oil and gas portion of the energy industry, here's the coal portion, here's the centralized power portion, here's the distributed, here's solar, here's batteries and so forth. It's all part of the energy industry. And if you take a look at what happened in California and still is happening, I think that's a great window into what I'm talking about is that, let's be frank, most people in oil and gas will look at that and say that's what those Californians deserve. They went out there and they didn't build these gas plants. They shut down the nuke plants and all that, and look what happens. There's a other side of that is saying, well, we should have moved faster and put storage out there faster and put more out there, and that's what happened. We didn't move quick enough on the new energy side of things. And my response to that is, you're both right. Mm-hmm. Okay, you can't sit there and pretend like technology is not moving as fast as it is. The world's not changing. Mm-hmm. Things are moving ahead, and they're moving ahead quickly. This is not the future. This is the present. Get with the program. Figure out how maybe you can make more money doing what my part of the energy business maybe than the other part, right? But understand that things are moving fast. So adopt that. Don't push back on that. The other side of this, though, on my side of the industry is like, hey, let's be practical. There's only so many batteries I can get my folks to install in a day. Okay. So shutting down the gas plants too fast is a appropriate criticism. And we need to make sure that we're balancing things. We're being real so that we don't have these kind of problems. So it's more, again, and it's hard to find these days in the political landscape as we're now less than 50 days away from the election, is the answer is in the middle, folks. It's a balance, and that's what we need to have, is a balance approach.
That's you're very good at what you do, and I mean that sincerely, because I'm listening to you talk, and obviously you have, I don't want to say an agenda, but you certainly have your presentation and what you're talking about. You're passionate about it. And you seem to answer questions as they might come up from a skeptic, right? So you clearly run into the question about the mining or whatever, because those are the things we hear, right? And those are the things that I don't want to say we're trained to say by any means, but, and, as you're talking, it isn't above all or all of the above approach currently. I'm wondering, David and I had, we've had a couple of congressmen on the show, and the show is apolitical, but what we say to both of them, or the two guys we've had, is like, we're looking for reasonable people. And I'm curious, are you seeing reasonable legislation? Are you seeing reasonable conversations taking place? Or is it just craziness on both sides right now? And and business has to find its way in the middle.
And throw in, does the election, if Biden gets elected, does that change things dramatically as we expected with Obama as well?
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, the answer is no. I don't see any intelligent conversations. Like, for instance, in my opinion,
we don't either. We were hoping we would.
Did y'all accomplish anything from with the two congressmen?
They were great. And it was Wesley Hunt. I didn't mean to cut you off. Wesley Hunt is running.
Candidate.
He's a candidate.
He's candidate. Yeah.
And Dan Crenshaw, actually.
Sure.
And they're
good guy.
They're both great, and they seem reasonable. And we asked both of them the same question, and I promise we'll let the guests talk. But we love to hear ourselves talk, quite honestly. So it's go to Washington, be reasonable, right? That's what we're hoping for. So back to the whole reason we're here. Yeah. You're saying that you don't see people or the conversation being reasonable.
No, and I think, unfortunately, we've as a country, and both sides are to blame here, we've politicized it. And in some cases, and I'm guilty of it too, we've romanticized it. Hey, I want to stay in doing what I did because my daddy did this 30 years ago too. And okay, well, Amazon wasn't here 30 years ago, so neither was, the iPhone. So I guess you're not doing those. I mean, things change, things move. There's different ways to make money. Let's go. Let's do it. I mean, what should be about is, okay, what's best for the consumers, what's best for wealth creation and job creation, and let's go do that. Okay. And if there's people that fall out of that in terms of there's a negative environmental impact and there's people that can't afford the energy, let's figure out how to deal with those issues, through a government, whether that's federal or state. And instead we just have people just, you're evil. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's not helpful. And that's what I'm saying is, you go to California and that example, and there's examples here too of this. I mean, we're not the the shiny white state. California is all the center. All right, we've got our own sins that we should look at and say, look, wait a minute, there is a transition going on here, but you can't just shut off natural gas right away. You can't do it. It's not practical. So we need to figure out how we work together to get the right transition at the right pace for people.
But do you get rid of it at all? And I guess I don't even know that solar, wind, et cetera, is the answer, for the long term. I mean, I think we're going to be stuck with natural gas and oil through at least our lifetime and probably our children's lifetime. But I don't think it's a binary discussion, given the fact that largely significant part of the world, populated world, is still asleep. And if they do have any energy sources, they're burning dung or coal. I mean, they're still building a rapid number of coal-fired power plants in Asia. And, there's this belief that that's not going to come over here and affect us or affect the broader climate, but nobody's talking about that. I think we've been somewhat responsible here in the States. And when you talk to energy executives more on the fossil fuel side that we interview, and Ira and I've talked with and are friends with. When you talk to them about this, I think all of them agree that there's room for, more new energy development out there, because the demand ultimately is going to be there. The demand, I think, has been somewhat, diminished by COVID-19, but I think global energy demand is going to go up because all these technologies and devices require a battery or some additional technology, and that's got to be generated from something. And some of it can be solar and wind, but to your point, it's going to be interesting to see how it evolves and improves. And to your point about the batteries, I think that's great to see that technology improve, and we expect to see that. I think not so much out of environmental need, but out of economic need in the oil and gas business, and by virtue of that, you get the benefits of environmental stewardship.
I want to pivot real quick. You said something a second ago about the iPhone, and 30 years ago Amazon didn't exist. You didn't have an iPhone. So, do you know who Colin Cowherd is? The guy, ESPN. Yeah. I love, right? He has the herd. I've learned, I was an outdoor or an outside salesman in my early days. So I'm always listening to the radio on the road as I'm out. And he would, I learned as much business from him as I did sports, quite honestly. And one of the things that he would say is he's not a traditionalist, right? His family moved a lot growing up. So traditions to him didn't mean as much as they might for a family that never moved and went to grandma's house every, Christmas or Saturday or whatever it was. So I'm curious, your forward thinking, it seems to me unique. It seems to me very forward, quite honestly. And I'm wondering, you say you grew up in Bryan, your family is from Bryan, your dad went to A&M, or at least graduate studies. And so you don't have necessarily a background that would open you up to all of this, I don't want to say forward thinking, but certainly kind of a visionary. So where did that come from over the last 20 years? How do you have such a what's the word I'm looking for? The ability to kind of look past maybe what is traditional, and is it a monetary view, or is it just something that's always come natural to you?
I like thinking. I read history, travel quite a bit with my family, taking the kids all over the world. I like different perspectives. I think listening to people is important. I think, frankly, given that little bit of the conversation we just had, we listen to each other more so than anybody in Congress has listened to each other in the last 10 years about anything. And those topics are just as important, if not more so, right? Pandemic included. And I think that's important, is to listen to folks, because everybody's got something to offer. And when you do that, you piece all this different information pieces together, and then you think about, there's a pattern that you can recognize, and then you apply that pattern, you move it out. You don't know exactly when it takes place, but you can kind of see what's going to happen. And a big part of this is be objective. It's really, really tough. You got to leave your opinions aside and what you want to be true, and you look at this and say, what could this be? I mean, it's the old, if the only answer that comes back is the crazy answer, well, then that's the answer, the crazy answer. And so, I think that's been most beneficial to me. No, and you're being kind to me. No, I didn't go to Berkeley or anything like that, and didn't live out. I've never lived out in California. And
where did you go crazy, man? No.
I think he's saying for an Aggie, you're really a
I mean, I was like, when you were
and
saying
I didn't
that,
even go to Texas. I mean, so, but
Ira's smiling about that. He's like,
I'm just laughing.
Yeah. But I think and look, I think it should be the folks here that think about energy better than anybody else really in the world, I think, and looking at this and saying, well, why can't we sell them some gas and sell them some solar and battery power, right? Well, let's do all of it. Let's not just sit here and pigeonhole ourselves into it and get into these, well, I think this is going to last forever, and you're evil, and we're not going to do this. It's crazy. And if, Obama wasn't president 10 years ago, this would never would happen. I mean, just stop. I mean, just, maybe, I don't know what's going to happen. I'll tell you, if solar panel efficiency continues to rise at the rate that it is, I don't know if my kids will always use hydrocarbons.
So
I don't know,
Bill,
but that could be the case. It could not be the case. Let's have an open mind about things.
So building on that, the majors and the large utilities, what does it look like in 20 years? And you've seen some of them really move forward with some of this technology. Is that just to get a good ESG score, or are we seeing, and do you envision a real pivot with some of these very, very large and old energy companies with hundreds of thousands of employees that are very smart people that you alluded to at the very beginning?
They are, and so one of the profs that I had at Harvard was the late Clayton Christensen. He wrote a book that made him famous and I think pretty wealthy, called The Innovator's Dilemma. And he writes about this problem.
Right.
And, I told a very close friend of mine about 17 years ago, the thing that's made Exxon great is the thing that will kill it. And that's happening. There's just a total focus, but no ability to recognize that there's change here, not coming, and to pivot. And if you look at it, history's not kind to the big oil majors, and you look at any industry about having an incumbent change. And doesn't mean it can't happen, though. There are a couple examples of firms that have really shifted. And it remains to be seen, for instance, in electric vehicles, will GM make the shift or not? Yeah. And right now, a lot of investors have gotten extremely frustrated with General Motors and said, we're going to go fund some of these rank startups because you can't get out of your own way. I heard that today, actually. And that's where all the money's flowing, is to give it to the hands of the entrepreneurs. And look, we have to remember, entrepreneurs built Exxon. Entrepreneurs built Chevron. Entrepreneurs built Schlumberger and Halliburton, all this. Mm-hmm. Just did a number of decades ago, if not longer, right? It's companies aren't supposed to last for decades or centuries. They're supposed to be doing one function that's been started up, always by definition an entrepreneur, a man or woman, and then they've been able to go out there and have success and bring other people into it. So from a community standpoint, a country standpoint, do we need to have all these big oil companies really make the turn? I would say no. Maybe they need to stay focused on what they're doing, do that best, slim down, cut the costs, get it done, and then let other companies pick up the growth and change the energy business. The utility side is where we need to have some changes. This is America. CenterPoint and the rest of these companies, I don't mean to pick on CenterPoint, but any utility is not a capitalistic entity. It is socialism and communism. I mean, co-ops and everything. There's no choice as a utility. It's a monopoly. And there's no choice given to the consumer. The consumers must have choices. At least in Houston, Dallas, we've given some choice to sign up, like you can sign up with Reliant and other folks right out there, that you have a choice to be able to do that. But all across the country, most people don't have that choice. We need to take that Texan way of looking at things and saying everybody needs to have a choice. And so if you don't want solar panels on your roof, you don't need to have it. You get to choose what you want to do. That's the change that needs to happen in the energy business. Will some utilities, like NextEra, is very aggressive out there, had a lot of success in renewables and so forth. I think that's a great example of a so-called dinosaur and so forth making the turn. I think they're going to make it, right? I think they're going to do it. So there are good examples, but unfortunately they're few and far between. But that's not unique to the energy business.
Well, go ahead.
What about some of the power companies? I was with an executive of a power company the other day that already has an embedded customer base, and instead of looking to go the solar panel on the roof way, which is to be viewed as invasive, and interestingly, we just moved into our house. We built directly behind our house, I guess. And it was plumbed for solar. It was for code. And of course, I like it to be real cold, and I like my ice machines to work. And I got the 27 kW nat gas backup generator. So when we get hit, I'm still got the AC
one of those
roll.
too.
Yeah. But their point was, we already have the customer base. We don't necessarily want to be invasive, installing solar panels and doing the battery, because we may not have one. We're thinking about just going and building solar farms and giving these customers an opportunity to check the box and say, we want energy from the solar farm, or be an investor in the solar farm that ultimately is pumping electricity into the grid. What do you think about that?
Well, that's fine, and I think that look, there's different structures out there. For instance, the building we're sitting in, it's not practical to have a bunch of solar panels on the roof and it's going to give you all the energy. I think that's that's not going to happen anytime soon. But sitting at your house, it is practical to have that. And what I would say is that it's not just invasive. It's saying, hey, how do I give you more reliability than you're going to get from that wire, right? So if you are an engineer, that every foot of wire that's coming from your house that started out that plant is a failure point, right? Theoretically, right? And we've seen it become reality every so often, and more so than we'd like to see. So I would say that you need a combination of economics, reliability, and some being environmentally friendly.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that people look at it in that order. The vast majority, 95+% of the people out there. So when he's talking about, sounds to me like something that's a little bit more of environmental first, that market, pretty small. Now, Texas is a big state. That's pretty small.
Mm-hmm.
So personally, I wouldn't do that business. But, is there something out there? Sure. There's so much to do, and there's different segments of customers and so forth. And that's what I'm saying is, let the market, let the entrepreneurs in the market figure this out. You're going to be fascinated with what's actually going to happen.
Well, I think your example of the wireless model, the mobile phone model for power, I think is a great analogy. And we've seen how ubiquitous that's become globally. And when you made the point about the clipping the wires, I think that's also an interesting point as well.
Hey, speaking of the market, being able to choose and markets, one of the biggest complaints over the last decade for renewable energy has been the government subsidies. And when will we be able to get away from the government supporting various technologies, solar and wind? Let's just pick those two.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Where you think we are with that? What your thoughts are on subsidies?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I don't like subsidies. So I did fight against the ITC extension back in 2015. I'm for it now. So why did I flip flop? I should run for Congress.
Okay.
I'll tell you, and I'll be brutally honest. I think for a Republican administration, I'm very disappointed in the lack of belief in the market. I want to see choice and deregulation spread, and we should talk about it as consumers' choice, instead of trying to mandate, in this case, coal or nuke or something else. So I've seen nothing but government from both parties trying to tell me what to do, and throwing more subsidies at coal, more subsidies at centralized power, more subsidies at oil and gas and so forth, not less. And I'd like to really drain the swamp and just get rid of everything. And maybe you don't think your subsidy and oil and gas is a subsidy. That's okay. Why don't we just take it away? Then we won't have to worry about it. Like, let's just level the tax code out. Let's level the field out. Say, let the consumers choose. Let's see who, just basically a gladiator pit. Let's see who comes out of the pit alive.
Yeah, but do you think
that's too commonsensical, though?
Yeah,
I mean,
I hear that, but I feel like, and maybe I'm wrong, and I'm not trying to hold on to this, but I feel like solar would get creamed if that was the case.
No, we'd cream them.
Really?
Yeah, because there's there's more subsidies that are being put into the system to basically bolster the existing incumbents, and whether that's the monopoly utilities, because they're hurting. Some of these utilities are experiencing permanent demand decline. Not just they're not growing anymore, they're declining, right? And then you've got a lot of other folks that are in the oil and gas. Well, I want this, I want, no royalty payment. I mean, all this stuff that's going on out there, and the coal guys, boy, they got their hands out. I mean, I made a prediction. You talk about visionary. Walk in the halls soon as back in 2017, after Trump's election, I told both sides, members of Congress, both chambers, you watch it. The coal guys are going to come in here looking for a bailout. That's crazy. That's just you solar guys, man. You're just looking for money. Okay, watch. And by the way, the nuke guys are going to be right there with them. You know how long that took? 3 months.
They waited.
And I came back a few months later, and they're like, "Wow, didn't see that." They were here.
So
they had to be, because you know what? Coal is not economic. When you have it compared to fracked gas and solar, and now solar and storage, and even wind, it's not economic.
yeah, I don't think anybody in here. I think we're all agreeing with you that that's it. For the reason I say the creamed part, I go back to maybe the fight of the early 2010s was such that it did seem like there was a lot of bad press on some subsidies that went out early. Is that what I'm just recalling? Is that old information?
Yeah, and there was all the like Solyndra and all that. Yeah. And look, but I can give you that clean coal plant debacle down in Georgia, right, or in Mississippi. I mean, I can give you that one too. And so my point is, there is a entire swamp here. There is a lot of sin, and the reason why I support the ITC now is that, okay, you know what? I'm not going to be the only fool at the card table that doesn't get subsidized. Everybody's getting their subsidies. I guess that's the way we're going to do things. I don't agree with that system. I think everybody ought to get their subsidies taken away, including solar.
To be clear, I'm not advocating one way or the other. I was pointing that out. I think that I think coal has had its day. I don't know why they're still getting money. Although I don't live in
because they live in the swing states.
Exactly. That's my point. Exactly. I don't live in those states, so I don't have as much.
Well, it's still being consumed in other parts of the world. I think what's interesting about the ESG movement that a lot of people are scared of, and I don't think they should be. I think I equate it to enterprise risk management as a whole, and I really think while the concept is great, they got the initials wrong. Good governance is what drives all of this stuff, and I think as more attention is put there, it's going to create some discipline and accountability that we've not had and have been running away from for a while. And whether it's subsidies or the financial engineering of, well, it didn't work out, we'll just file bankruptcy and reward the same team to go do the same thing again. And ultimately, we already know how that's going to play out, which is insanity, doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results. I think it's going to be interesting to see greater visibility and this element of accountability that's not been there in the past, because financials are fungible. You can put lipstick on a pig, but to show continuous improvement, accountability, I don't know why people don't adopt more of this and really take it and run with it, because if you do, you're going to build a more resilient, sustainable business. You're going to have the margin expansion. You're going to survive. I think, in business, unlike other things, not all businesses should get a participation trophy. You either have a good business model with good management discipline or you don't. And I think that's true in any business. And I think your idea of taking away all subsidies, it would be interesting to see who ultimately survives if that were the case. I know as a taxpayer, just like all three of you in the room, it'd be interesting to see how things would change if we took away some of the gains.
Yeah. And I agree with your points. You've got to understand the whole energy chain. I mean, that's something we try to do at Simmons, and I think we're pretty good at figuring out, okay, I mean, you're already quoting, here's coal, I'm competing against coal, I'm competing against nat gas, how it all works. I can't turn this switch off. It's, to your point, you look at numbers in the future, you can add electric vehicles, but still there's going to be around the world still a lot of hydrocarbon fueling. But the renewables growth is going to be there, and just having two sides in Washington right now just pit against each other and try and negate or cancel each other out isn't going to really work. You need some people that can see the whole thing.
I've not heard I've not heard a good argument for replacing plastic yet, which is
I can't tell if you're the best guest we've ever had, or if this conversation is just naturally flowing like this. Because again, the conversation that Ira just brought up there, the point is, my thought is, and you've already mentioned this, is that I'm curious to know, is energy working with solar at all? And do you see an area for partnership, some type of coordination there? Because
great question.
I mean, I just hear,
you mean oil and gas?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry. I said energy. Excuse me.
Traditional.
Yeah.
I got started. I was backed by two oil and gas families. One, fantastic entrepreneur, oil and gas. And I have members of my board, pretty prominent oil and gas folks. And So I think that, again, it's about people, and people make the difference. And when you're looking at, is there partnership here? Yes, I want to go get the best people, many of which I see in oil and gas, to come over and work with me. And so, yeah, in that respect, in the most important respect, we absolutely have partnerships that are going on.
Well, let me take it further then, not just, potential employee pool. I mean, actual.
Well, I work for the board, to be clear, and they're on the board and they're shareholders.
No, I mean just the organizations or other industry, energy. I keep saying energy, but I am speaking oil and gas companies. Yeah. I think there'd be a lot of people interested in kind of a mixed bag, because that's the one thing David brings up all the time on the podcast. I think oil and gas does get a bad reputation for their role in the world of the environment, wanting to be part of the solution. So I just, I don't know where you were going to go on that, David.
Well, I was just going to say, Leslie Beyer, who's been a guest, and we've helped her with start a show. She's president of the Petroleum Equipment Service Association. She said, and I agree with her, that the energy transition is probably best led by folks that are in the energy business. And if you think about all of the embedded intelligence and experience and know-how from an engineering perspective, science, et cetera, it largely resides in the oil and gas business. And you see some of the changes that have occurred, from an electrical perspective, mechanical perspective, whatever. A lot of that's in the energy business. And you see some of the more diversified, larger service companies in particular, NOVs, et cetera, starting to gravitate. But whether you go offshore or whether you're out in the field, I've seen solar panels used for 20 years, not to the extent that you're talking about utilizing them. But I think the industry has found opportunities for elements of that to support what it does, whether it's on production equipment or on a rig or whatever. But it's not been viewed as a mainstream power source. And now that's the case. And I think a lot of that, though, has been driven by the fact that the technology wasn't necessarily there yet, but is there, and to your point earlier, is going beyond what most people can envision.
Well,
So,
I would add to that almost, a large part of our business comes from private equity firms and that are primarily energy focused or have a big energy component. And I would say if every single one of them is trying to pick all of our brains on what's going on, and they've raised separate funds or they've targeted money within funds like I have never seen, very quickly. Very smart people that know the industry, know the balance of, okay, coal offsets gas, okay, obviously petroleum for fuels and petrochemicals, and how does it all fit together? And there's a lot of money going into it and a lot of smart people that are traditional energy. I got a call yesterday from somebody that is an oil and gas entrepreneur, and he is funded by these private equity firms. He said, can you guys come over here? Can you sit down? I need to understand this landscape. I've got to pivot or at least diversify. He's not going to leave what he's leaving, but they're going to diversify. So I do believe wholeheartedly that this industry is, well, I'll just tell you, some of the most honest people in the world, smartest people in the world, hardworking people. And those people are going to figure this out. I just like you, John, they may not be as visionary, because I think you're extremely visionary, but they're going to figure out, they're good at contrasting and comparing, and they're going to figure out how to get into this business and what makes it drive. And my hope is in 20 years, my kids are around, I have a son in the energy business. I hope he's figured it out and moved to where as Gretzky would say, where the puck's going.
That's right.
Not where it was.
Yeah.
And so I think that's great. And then additionally, sorry to be long-winded, but we have got investors now that are traditional oil service investors that are now wearing two hats. They're moving into the renewable side. But you know why they picked them? And they may be E&P people, because they understand the energy chain. It used to be give it to the technology person. You look at Tesla, really hard company to analyze. You got our transportation guy, and they're like, can you bring in your renewables guy? Because they have this whole batteries business. Mm-hmm. So I really do think that transfer of intellectual knowledge on the energy chain is big. And I don't think should be afraid of it. I mean, I think to your point, we should embrace it, and it's cool.
Yeah, I don't think it's an either or. I think it's an and. But even those guys who are fading away from traditional oil and gas and getting into renewables, not to disappoint them, but the fundamentals still apply.
Yeah.
You got to have a management team that's disciplined,
Sure.
that's aware of their risk, that is going to be accountable, and is going to make hard decisions even if they don't seem popular. Otherwise, you're just going to watch that capital go away because lack of discipline ultimately fails.
Yeah, I didn't say they're moving away.
Yeah.
I said they're balancing it out. Right?
Well,
yeah, absolutely.
So we there's a book that we reference fairly often on this show. It's The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels by Alex Epstein. Have you heard of this book?
I heard of it. Yeah.
You said you'd like to read. It's an interesting read. A very smart young guy that wrote the book, and because you talked about perspective of those in Texas versus in California, right? And which I totally agree with. We turn I don't even think about turning an AC on. Whereas if you're Puerto Rico, you may think about lights or whatnot. So, but his perspective is in America as a whole, it's very easy to want certain things for energy because of the ease of which any of us can turn the light switch on versus somebody in another country where it's not as easy to get accessible energy. So that, again, just from a pure interesting read, I highly recommend it. I'm curious to know if there's a book that you would recommend our audience read and maybe kind of get a different perspective that you'd want us to, because I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, right? And I hope that everybody else has that's listened to it. I know everybody in the room has certainly. Is there something that you would kind of point us to say, hey, this is a great read, maybe help your frame of mindset?
I don't think so. Nothing comes to mind. I'll think about that and
let
you know later. But I think things are so fast moving, and there's nobody that's really, again, too often I've seen a lot of things like we should just go do this and put solar panels everywhere right now because we've got to save the planet, right? And there's no more about like, hey, this is how the world is going to, really materialize, and this is how it's going to feather it, in terms of the change. And by the way, there's a big difference. A lot of people are like, oh, solar. Like, yeah, I saw a bunch of those panels in the field out there off the highway. Well, that's not what I do. I compete with that. Right? And they're like, well, wait a minute. Is that kind of like solar on solar crime? And well, I compete with solar farms just as much as I compete with coal-fired plants and gas-fired plants. I mean, it's a centralized power and decentralized. And so that kind of understanding of the landscape and so forth, nobody's put together in any book.
Well, and that's fair, right? I mean, I do want people to have a place to go, and I don't want to put too much pressure on you, and I don't know if I said this on air or off air, but if you do any research on you, there's lots of YouTube videos, there's interviews, and there's a couple of them that describe you as kind of not the poster boy, that's not the right word, but just the torch bearer at the moment. Are there any other guys or girls or companies or just I'm really looking for a place to send the audience of, and if it's you, then I'll send it to you. And I mean that because I think you do it in a very reasonable way. So I mean that, but if something does come up in the next 15 minutes before we shut this down, I'd love to hear something that you say, you know what, actually check out this video or this movie or this documentary or whatever it is, because it's just like anything. The more you know, the better it is. And, I think we do need an educated audience population, whatever you want to call it. So that's just between now and 15 minutes when we wrap it up. If not, I'm sending them all to you, and you're in trouble.
Well, look, I think that's fine. I appreciate that, Judd. Look.
Well, I think you do a great job of explaining it. I mean, it seems very reasonable. You live in the oil and gas capital of the world, and you should be an oil and gas guy. You're an A&M, you're an Enron, you live in Houston, and you're not.
All my friends are in oil and gas,
and all your friends are in oil and gas. So, I mean, I think that there is a special position that you have to be able to understand, maybe an audience that does need, I don't want to say hear things, but just to hear all the different sides of it, understand all the sides of it, I should say.
Well, he's a rational consumer. He does have a nat gas backup generator, so he hadn't completely cut the cord.
But look, natural gas, I think, is going to be a part of it, the solution for a long time. And, I will say this, I've been too, as crazy as this sounds, and I know it sounds crazy, I've been too conservative. The pace of technology change and the price of solar, aren't so get creamed without subsidies. Solar panels they fell 4 years ago at 95% within it was about 9 years. So if you can follow that, basically solar panels crashed in price 4 years ago. They've just been leveling out ever since then. We've got the Trump tariffs with the China trade war and all that stuff. But essentially, I wouldn't have thought. Remember we sold that company.
Mhm.
I didn't think that was going to happen for like 2 decades, right? I mean, and it happened so fast. Batteries are happening even faster than I thought. And so what I've been thinking about has been too conservative. Is something just to kind of think about. And so when I go talk about what's happening with folks around town, I said, hey, just have an open mind. Think about this. I mean, we are, and you guys are right. The oil and gas industry is diverse. Look at Houston, most diverse city in the United States. It's not New York, not L.A. Sorry, folks in New York and L.A. It's Texas. It's Houston. Why? For the oil and gas industry. Okay. And we also got the shipping industry to thank too, right, with the port. Most high tech, one of the most high tech industries out there, oil and gas. You go figure out how to punch a hole X miles underneath all that ocean, right? Go figure that out. That's pretty tough. Then you got to figure out, like, how do I make sure all this stuff doesn't spill in the ground, spill in the air, and all this other stuff. I mean, there's a lot that goes into this. And you've got to figure out how to work with governments around the world, both local and federal and so forth. So there's a lot of skill sets here and some of the smartest people and the best culture, the most diverse, which is a hot topic these days, we all know. I mean, we are the ones that should be leading the charge. We should be sitting there saying, and Iris heard me say this all the time, it's like, when somebody calls him up from an energy company, he's not asking whether oil and gas or solar and storage. He's like, how can I help you? Here's my fee.
What I think is interesting about your business model is something I changed my perspective on your business when you gave the wireless. When you have perspective, you traveled around the world as I think I know all of us have. You look at the adoption of wireless technology from a communication standpoint in other parts of the world that are not as developed infrastructure wise, and that technology is just skyrocketed. They're kind of leading the charge, and I think where you've got institutional infrastructure, it's a lot more difficult for that. But I think in some of these emerging markets where the power demand is coming, mainly because they have wireless communication, the world's getting exposed to the broader world. I think your model makes a lot of sense because it's going to lead to faster electrification than if they have to wait on wire for transmission of power. Unless, of course, they've got gas being piped in there or
which, to your point, most
tanked.
don't. Right, the vast majority don't.
Which is interesting. I had one other question.
Yeah,
I forgot what my question was.
Keep thinking here. So we'll. I have no idea how long we've been going. This is maybe an hour or so. So while he's thinking of the question, you said you're a history buff, right? Do you read what kind of books do you read, and what do you read right now? And that's one, and two. Any kind of podcasts that you listen to on a regular basis? Other than obviously this one from now on.
From now on, it's going to be this one. In terms of history reading in recent, I would say that I've first started out when I was a boy, World War II, and then got into World War I, Spanish-American War, so all the wars. I'm a boy, right? So and it was just all history is just looked there.
You ever listen to the Dan Carlin?
Yes. I had a friend, oil and gas friend, put me into that. So I've listened to some of that stuff. It's really good. But also I look at internationally and all through human history. So read a lot of books on the Roman Empire, and even before that, a lot of some of the other empires around the Middle East. The most recent ones, just through travel, is I read a history on Estonia. I've read a lot on Genghis Khan, and really the biggest empire the Earth's ever seen. And the most recent one, and it was a really thick book I got from an oil and gas guy, you guessed it, was a history of the Balkans, which really, even today, I now understand all the little pieces and what's going on and so forth, and what's happening in that part of the world, and then obviously what washes up to in terms of problems for us to deal with as a country. So I like fitting all the different pieces together. So when I go to the different countries, Israel or Japan or Korea, I can understand China. I can think, you know what, I understand where you're coming from. And because there's all little piece of us still goes back to the history of this country and the history of this state, right? We're independent, we're Texans because we fought a war for our independence. We were our own country before we decided to join the states.
So just pivoting back to just renewable energy, we talked a lot about solar, we've touched on wind. Just stepping back, what are some technologies that are emerging or could be pretty important in the future? A lot of folks talk about hydrogen from a fueling standpoint, obviously used in fuel cells. There was, 10 years ago, the biofuels were big. That market has shrunk down some. But what are your thoughts on all those? Because I know you've touched a number of these things over your career.
Yeah. Well, I'm not infallible. And you just ask my wife. She'll give you a list of. You'll be here the rest of the day. Forget about an hour in the podcast about my shortcomings. But I will say this. Biofuels is not something I'm not going to ever get back into again. I did that once, and I got that T-shirt. I failed miserably.
Participation.
Participation, and I don't have anything to do with it. And there's nothing wrong with it per se. I just I screwed it up, didn't make a good bet, and really I don't really see a huge future for it because I do think some other things like with solar and
EVs
and so forth, EVs, I think are going to displace that. But so I'd say others are better at that, and some of that I'll just freely admit is emotional. When you lose that much of part of your career and money and so forth, you just don't want to go back. So
understand.
I helped run a .com.
Can we delete this entire portion?
You going to fund a .com anytime soon? Probably not, right?
No, we did get everyone's money back in a small account.
Yeah, well, you did better than me.
12 years.
You did better than me. But I do think that, like, for instance, solid-state batteries, I think a lot of things on the battery side are very interesting. I do think there's some role to fill with fuel cells. We're doing some things that we'll talk about more publicly as a company on the fuel cell side of things. By the way, Elon Musk has a very different view of that. He calls them full cells.
Yep.
And here's another thing is I'll tell you about 3 years ago, I thought, it's nice, Elon. I don't really see the pace of battery progression because I was listening to all the so-called experts and so forth. He was right. If you had a snapshot my thoughts based on the conventional wisdom and what he said 3 years ago, I'm dead wrong.
Have you met Elon?
No, I haven't.
What about hydrogen? Just as a fueling?
Well, it's a storage piece, and it's not a great storage compared to chemical storage, which is Elon's point. But I do feel like it has some role in there, mainly because I can send that natural gas through there, that line converted over to it, and maybe there's some more efficient ways of generating that hydrogen by, essentially cracking water, right, through electrolysis on some applications and so forth, and maybe some cases in the transportation side of things. But I do wonder if the batteries and therefore the chemical storage and electric with solar generation and so forth move so fast that it just kind of cuts off hydrogen. Okay. I don't know if that happens, but that would be a concern.
Anything on smart grid or any of that from your perspective?
I think smart grid is basically is used by the monopolies to go out and spend everybody's money and make money on it. I think that there are some roles for this, but I think what's being smart grid is not defined, and I just get worried and I hold my wallet every time somebody says smart grid. And I think that we need to think about. I saw
you reach for it, so I didn't.
Yeah, we need to think about how do I put that backup, that battery and that solar at my house. I don't need your grid any smarter. Thank you. I'll keep my money and I have higher reliability than you trying to make something a little bit more reliable.
What I thought was interesting, somebody said I was with the other day, was talking about the Tesla car and this, that, and the other. And these are all oil and gas guys. And one of the guys, executives, bought one of these cars, but they all went to lunch in there, and it's got the park function, which is really cool, where they just left the car and the car comes back to them after lunch and the doors open. Very cool. But
I've got that feature too. It's called valet.
Yeah. But what they were talking about is that the step change for Tesla has not so much been in the battery in this particular sense, but the AI that's associated in the car and how it is learning to operate the transmission and not the transmission, but the motor and the fluid that they were utilizing to get a step change in efficiency that they were not otherwise able to get because they didn't know. And the system teaching itself, which further complements and gives that extended range on that battery because of so I think it's interesting when we think about the energy sources, but this is something I've always talked about, even the traditional oil and gas guys, is that at some point the technology is going to evolve to where we're going to get better at utilizing the energy sources we have. So in a way, demand's going to go down regardless. And I think that's one of the other things that
that's a very good point. And you look at Tesla just briefly, the genius of what Musk did, aside from how to put all the individual cells together and cool it to make some battery, was he said, I'm going to make something that is cool.
Yeah.
Not more eco. One of your earlier questions.
Yeah.
And that was the brilliant decision. And that car can do things that a nice car can't.
Well, he started out with a sports car.
That's what my point is. That's what my point is.
One.
And I've had countless conversations that the way that your oil and gas CEO friend that's got the Tesla, I've been at dinners, and these are good friends. They'll start. This is a couple of years ago. Elon Musk is an idiot. His stock's a short. I've shorted it. Everybody shorted it. We go out to the valet line. Half of them had Teslas. I'm like, guys, what the heck? And they're like, well, that's just me. That's just me. Yeah. And I was like, you're giving him money to get down the price curve, right? And so what we got to think about in summation is that as we look ahead to the future, maybe the future has different uses of energy for it, because we're going to make something as in totally different, like in your house, function totally differently, that you're like, yeah, I want that. Yeah. And it's not about, hey, is it 11 cents a kilowatt hour coming out of the solar panels, or is it, because I can get you 10 coming out of the, gas-fired generation. It's like, no, I don't care. I want that. I want my home to do all these cool things, and it can only do that with the solar and batteries.
I mean,
that's what's going to happen. That's what is happening. If you haven't
looked up the Tesla wall battery.
Powerwall.
I'm sorry. That's cool.
It is cool.
It's cool looking. And, yeah. So that's to your point.
To that point, Josh, and this is my low tech question that I couldn't remember a second ago. I think it's a good question, and it speaks to what you guys do. So we've got this diverse group of listeners, and it's growing, and we're very excited about that. But if they're listening today and they like what they're hearing from you, and they go, heck, I want Sonova. How does one go about saying, I want Sonova solar panels on my roof and a battery backup? I want that on my house.
I want Sonova service. How does that happen?
Sonova service.
You can call us. We'll put you in touch with a dealer. And we'll come out to your house and obviously call you first and get the information and so forth. In this pandemic, we'll maybe do more all of it over the phone if you want to, or Zoom calls and such.
Sure.
We can do that, and our dealers have gotten very good at that through this crisis. Or we'll be out to your house and sit down, whatever you want, and take you through things and say, okay, and this is your different options, your different products, your plans, if you will, just like you'd go into AT&T and get a new cell phone for your kid as soon as they're old enough. So it's just the same thing. We're trying to make it easy to just sign up for a service. If you think you're going to put a bunch of panels on your roof and it's a product, hey, things break. Squirrels chew on conduit, fuses blow, all this stuff happens. You've got a bunch of computers all over your house now. How many times did your computer die over the last 30 days? It happens a lot, and so what you want is say, hey, look, I want that service to show up. However you do it here, I want to see what that looks like in my house and so forth. Let's talk about that. But you're responsible, Sonova, for making sure all this stuff works. Just like CenterPoint's responsible for making that power go through that line attached to the back of your house.
Cool. That's a great question.
So go ahead, buddy.
Well, I was going to say, so what's the website for Sonova? Sonova.com or
Sonova.com.
So we wrap these things up with a question on you. And what would you tell yourself, your 20-year, 30-year ago self, or a younger person getting into the business, a piece of wisdom, a pearl, an idea, something you live by that you'd like to pass on to our audience?
Wow, that's man.
We don't mess around.
Yeah,
this is the show of shows here.
That's it.
You didn't prep him for this question?
No, I did not. I was told not to.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's good. That's good. We like people in the hot seat.
I've been deferred gratification has been a big part of this. I mean, quite frankly, up until really the last, really in the last, not even 12 months, it's really been a hard road. I mean, you grow a solar company in oil and gas country, and I'll give you a little vignette. There was a number of years ago, was at my wife and I were at a charity function, and some guy came up to me and said, "Hey, John, you have 4 kids, right?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "You're in the solar business, right?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Do you need a job?" And he wasn't trying to be mean. He was being sincere about it. And I said, "No, I'm okay. I'm okay." Truth is, I've been through the highs and the lows, and certainly got the battle scars on the lows, and I'm sure I'll go through some more. But I think it's just staying, I think it's being patient. I mean, too often I was, too impatient to get some things done and push it and so forth. And as I said in the earlier part in answering your questions, if I had to go back 20 years ago, I'd have said, "Hey, look, this fracking thing, go into that first, then come out of it, and then go do the solar stuff," right? But then part of me comes back and says, would I be the person I am, and would I be in the position if I had done that? Maybe not. I'll never know that. But so I focused on what I thought was a long-term solution, long-term changes. But what came with that was a lot of sacrifice of time, and time is something you'll never get back.
Do you view yourself as an entrepreneur?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's no other way to call me, whether that's
serial.
Serial.
Yeah.
I mean, whether that is a compliment or not, that's definitely what I am. And I think the question is, the book's still being written, whether it's to be a good entrepreneur or not. I think I work every day to do that. My advice, though, is that I would, think about things, be smart, work hard, and be honest. And if you're missing one of those 3 things, you won't be successful. I don't care if you're trying to be an entrepreneur in oil and gas or trying to do that in solar. And that's some advice was given to me a number of years ago by an oil and gas CEO, matter of fact, and he was an entrepreneur too. And that's still obviously stuck with me, and is the advice I pass on.
Those truths they transfer, don't they?
Yep.
Ira, I mean, you hit a home run. We've waited 18 months for you to come on.
Pretty good right now.
Yeah, you came on strong. You bring a great guest.
Yeah, no, I think our decision was good to bring John on.
Well, what'd you think? Did you like being a co-host with us?
I loved it. Love to come back at some point.
You have to come back.
Yeah, it was great. I think just so people know, we haven't even stopped this thing the whole way through. We have just been stream of consciousness, which has been a lot of fun. So really appreciate what you guys are doing for the industry, across the entire industry, including renewables. So. And all the traditional stuff. Thank you for having me.
Well, Mr. DeRode, you have any pearls of wisdom to end us with here?
No, I just thought it was a great conversation. I enjoyed getting to meet John and hear a little bit more about his personal perspective about the business that you built. Congratulations to you. I think it's a neat business model. I'll be honest, I was somewhat of a skeptic at first, not because I was objective, but just, again, I think it's awareness. And you get entrenched in some things, and so thank you for coming on. I enjoyed visiting.
And we gave you time, and you didn't give us anybody, so we're going to send everybody to you.
Okay.
You haven't given us anywhere else, so I would encourage the audience. I've done enough research to say that if you Google Sonova, if you look up John and some videos, you're going to find some information. Probably go down some rabbit holes that are going to be interesting. So. I encourage the audience to go learn, and Ira, I'm sure you and your team have information that's available for people that want to call. Jonathan, our producer, our A&M extraordinaire back there, Aggie extraordinaire. You are the first video that we've ever done. So, John, how did we look back there, buddy? We look pretty good.
Yeah.
Thank God, and Aggie's running the show.
Hey, listen, this guy is amazing.
Absolutely.
Hopefully, when he comes back, we're going to get him a microphone and a camera so he can participate. He's a millennial, too. What was funny, so David and I would always be like, all right, so it's www.sonova.com, and we believe, and Jonathan would be like, hey, it makes you sound really old when you say www, right? Okay.
At least you don't say on the net.
On the interweb.
Web.
So, as usual, I'll wrap us up here, David. As usual, any complaints, send to david@oilfield360.com.
We changed chairs. Don't I get the good stuff?
No, absolutely not. And any compliments, send to josh@oilfield360.com. This is going to be on your favorite podcast platform. Look us up, oilfield360.com, www. Once again, Simmons, thanks for your partnership. Sonova, we wish you guys the best of luck. I do believe everything you said. You are very reasonable, and I'm not saying that in any other way except that I hope that you're. I hope that we can work together, and we being the mutual industries. And if there's anything we can do for you in the future, just let us know. David, loved it, man.
Yeah,
you're doing great. Appreciate it. Thank you, guys. Good luck to everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.